The next stage of this summit is about our plenary session to focus on the roles of the API community in America over the next 2 decades. And we're honored to have a very important panel, a panel of true leaders, which will be moderated by Elena Ong, co-editor of the AAPI Nexus Journal's special edition AAPI 2040 publication, and really to discuss the roles of AAPIs in the future. That AAPI Nexus Journal is for sale at the registration desk for $13 should you choose to buy one. This was a very important publication. I applaud the leadership of Elena, the entire editors and staff at UCLA who were able to pull this together and really drive a series of discussion items throughout the U.S. from many, many different contributors, including APIASF. And I'd like to welcome Elena to the stage along with our distinguished panel.
I'm just going to go get it. Well, I'm from California, so I still have a little jet lag, so my apologies for that. But I'm Elena Ong, and I'm proud to be the co-editor, along with Floyd Morey of Apex, of this journal, AAPIs 2040. For those of you who may not taken a look at this, here's what the journal looks like. It's going to be published in 2 editions. The first one came out last month during Asian Pacific American Heritage Month, and the next one will be out later on this year. We're hoping right around the election, a little bit before or after that. I want you to raise your hand if you know the following statistics. 1965, Civil Rights Movement, right? What % of Asians do you think we were, Asian Pacific Islanders? Anybody got an answer? Close to 0, close to 1, 2? About less than 1%. So you can see that we were practically invisible at that time. Today, a half a century later, we are 6% of America. And by the year 2040, we'll be 1 in 10 Americans. That's about the time that 1 in 2 Americans will be people of color. So that's a really significant convergence of numbers. So we'll be playing out our story on the American frontier as well as the people of color frontier. So this is big. It's double-digit big, because once you hit double digits, that's when the media pays attention to your story. And so we asked a number of community leaders to think about what these numbers mean to them and their communities, and we'd like the opportunity for 3 of them to share their narrative with you. And I've asked them each to introduce themselves to you, just in a very personal way. Alicia.
Malolele. It's an honor to be here, and I am just grateful for Scholarship Fund for the invitation to be part of this distinguished panel. My name is Alicia Tulua, and I am the Chief Operating Officer of Empowering Pacific Islander Communities, a national organization based out of LA that is working to promote social justice for Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander communities on the continent. So the question that Elena is challenging us with is to share how we got into this work. And I think many of us can say this, is that before I even came into this work, my journey was predetermined by who my parents were and their life and where they are in their lives. I was born and raised in Tonga, which is one of the Pacific Islands, and my parents decided to move here to the U.S. When I was 13. And so packed up our things and moved here. And as a teenager, it was a harsh shift to move from the islands to a predominantly white affluent community in Monterey, California. And so the culture shock was indescribable. However, that I think growing up in a household where I constantly heard my mom, who was a nurse, and my dad, who was an accountant, talk about grow up, go to college, come back and serve your community. There was advice that they gave my 3 older brothers, but somehow it stuck with me. And having moved here and grown up in Monterey, I assumed that this is the Pacific Islander American experience in this country. And it wasn't until I went off to college that I found out that it was starkly different for many of our Pacific Islander community. The experience was very different from what I had experienced. And I went to college to study science, and I got my master's in biology and was applying to medical school and decided that how am I going to serve a community that I'm hardly familiar with? And decided that I wanted to get into community work just to learn who gets to make these rules that we have to follow and who gets to decide what kinds of numbers represent my experience. And that was about 10 years ago that I decided to do that, and I haven't gone back to medical school yet. It's still nagging me in the back of my mind, but this work has been so important because immersing myself in community work has meant that I've learned that there are so many issues and not enough of us to do the work. And so I've been kind of making myself patient enough to be able to do this work. And it's been an honor because it has taught me so much more than I could have taught myself anywhere else in my education.
Thank you very much. Rita.
Hi, sorry. I'm Rita Panarins, and I am a Khmer American. I came to the United States with my parents as refugees from Cambodia. I was very fortunate to have come with both my brother, with my older brother. My older sister, unfortunately, didn't make it. And to answer the question of how I got into advocacy and why education advocacy, I want to share my dad's story. And that is, when he was 8 years old in Cambodia, he left his family to go to the temple so that he could learn to read and write, so he would be admitted into school, because he knew that was the only way that he could support his family, his parents, his siblings. And when we came here to the United States, my parents were actually fairly affluent in Cambodia, but we came here with nothing. And my father always told us, he said, no matter what happens to you, no matter how much money you make or how much money you lose, what people do to you, what they try to do to you, they can't take away your education. That is always yours. And that's why I work in education policy. It's why I want to make sure that all of our students, all of our families, whoever wants to have it, has that same opportunity that I had. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gregory Sandana. I serve as the Executive Director of the Asian Pacific American Labor Alliance. Our second Vice President, Kim Jaron, is in the building, so I wanted to give a shout out to him in the back. I was born in Guam and raised in California, and went to school at UCLA. And I got into organizing and advocacy through the UC Student Association and the United States Student Association, and eventually became the president of USSA, which actually what brought me to DC. And one of the pivotal moments was when we ran this campaign to pass the Healthcare and Education Reconciliation Act, which some people don't know was a combination of the Affordable Care Act and an education bill that was actually merged together to ensure there was enough votes for the bill to pass. And I remember being in the negotiations with members of Congress and actually pushed for the designation for APIASF, and that which actually led to the initial funding for APIASF. So I was proud to be able to be in that space as a proud Filipino American, Asian American at a mainstream organization representing our communities there, and really understood the importance of having people who looked like us in those spaces, and to have the opportunities that we have. And that's really what grounded and continues to ground my work at APALA, is that I know that there are resources that we need to have access to, and that there are stories that need to be told, and hope that we can be able to leverage these platforms to make sure that our communities get the things that we need.
Thank you, Greg. What I wanted to do is share with you that we're going to be 37 million Asian American Pacific Islanders. And what's very different about the projections that are done in this work relative to some of the ones that you may have seen by other demographers is that instead of just using race-only data, we actually use inclusive data. So that means we're counting blacks who are Asians, Native Americans who are Asian, Pacific Islanders who are also Asian, whites who are Asian, et cetera. But that gives you a sense of who we are. We are actually an increasingly multiracial group, and we'll go to those numbers a little later. Elise, I'm really glad that you said what you said about wanting to make sure that you spoke for the numbers rather than having the numbers spoken for you. And so we're actually going to continue this dialogue by actually us sharing what the projections are and having everybody on the panel talk about what those numbers mean for their community, because it's really important that we tell our own narrative through our own lens and through our own experience rather than have others tell that story on our behalf. So Alicia, the first question goes to you. NHPIs will increase from 1.5 million to 2.3 million by the year 2040, 3 times greater than the increase of the total population. What does that number mean for the Pacific Islander community?
I think it means that we have a lot more people. I think in these spaces where we're talking about Asian and Pacific Islander experiences and numbers, a lot of times we constantly have to emphasize the fact that the Pacific Islander numbers are, our Pacific Islander experiences are invisible in that combination of API. And so, you know, an increase of that much would mean that we may be a little bit more visible. However, that only depends on the work that gets done by those that are in the room and those of you that are emerging leaders, because, you know, even though it's a large increase for our community specifically, it's still very small in the bigger picture. But I think one thing that you can really think about is the percentage of our community that is multiracial. I think the Pacific Islander community has some of the highest multiracial proportion than you know, compared to other races. And so, what does that mean in the year 2040? If we don't continue the work that we do about building our narrative and building power in our stories, by that time, by 2040, with the increase in multiraciality in our community, that there would be a dilution in our identity. Right? There's a potential for that happening if we don't continue to build power in our identity as Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islander. So that's something that we are thinking about in our work, and especially in the realm of higher education and the constant advocacy for ethnic studies to be an emphasis. We're really proud to have been included in the Asian American Studies departments across the country, and we continue to advocate for our inclusion in that space, because it's really hard with our small numbers to be able to advocate for our own place, right? And so I think the work that you all are doing in higher education continues to carry our needs with you, and if we continue to fight that good fight in the year 2040 with that increase in numbers for our community, it also means an increase in visibility of who we are and also visibility of our issues. So I think that's one thing.
Thank you. And just to clarify, if you actually take the 1.5 million Pacific Islanders and we took out just the multiracial folks, that population would be halved. So that's a very significant depletion of numbers. Rita and Greg, the next question is for you, and it has to do with Asian Americans who will increase from 20.5 million to 35.7 million. What does that mean in terms of organizing your constituencies?
Sure. So at least for APALA and the work that we do, an increase in Asian Americans and also an increase in Pacific Islanders also is an increase in Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in the workforce, and in particularly the unionized workforce too. And what we've also found is that while actually in unionization numbers for all communities are going down, the Asian American Pacific Islander communities is actually going up. And so we see this as an opportunity, especially as folks are completing their education and going into the workforce, to be able to identify opportunities to be able to organize more, but also think about the types of work people will be able to have and the importance of being able to make a bridge between those opportunities as well.
Great. Rita.
So I'm going to bring it back to education because that's my specialty area. But by 2040, we're going to be 10% of the student population Now, 10% doesn't seem like a lot on its own, but when you look at some of the current laws, 10% of students are students with disabilities, and they have their own set of regulations and laws that every public elementary, middle, and high school has to follow. 10% is going to be the percentage of English language learners in the country in 2040 as well. So we should have our own set of laws. But in terms of 10% of the student population being Asian American and Pacific Islander, I think what that means is that we have to be in every single national conversation about education, because we don't see that right now. When I go to policy talks, I go to research events that are outside of the API community, I sit and I wait for the moment when API data gets put onto the PowerPoint slide, and it does not happen every single time. And it is offensive, it's humiliating to sit there and to know that you're not even considered, that you're invisible to all your fellow advocates and to policymakers who are talking about education that impacts your communities. So I'm going to say by 2040, we need to be well organized to make sure that we are working with the other communities of color, with our Latino brothers and sisters, with our African American brothers and sisters, our Native American brothers and sisters, to make sure that we are included when they talk about communities of color.
Thank you. I think that driving home the message of critical mass equals critical power. So I wanted to talk about, earlier we talked about myths of the model minority. There's also another little stereotype that's out there, and it's about the perpetual foreigner and about immigrants. But there's also another thought out there that Native Hawaiians are native and they're not immigrants, and the immigrant story doesn't relate to Pacific Islanders. We actually find, however, through our numbers, that 1 in 5 Pacific Islanders are foreign-born. And interestingly enough, Asian Americans, currently about 2/3 of them are foreign-born. But by the year 2040, 50% of them will be foreign-born and 50% will be native-born. That confluence of events will actually change the political trajectory for America. So I'd like you all to kind of comment on that.
I think when in thinking about this, right, it was really hard for us to talk about what's going to be our community's issues in 2040. It seems so far removed. But one thing that came to mind when we're thinking about, immigrants versus a native-born is the fact that there's there's something really big that's happening to our planet that is currently impacting the Pacific, right? And so I'm talking about climate change and how that is going to have an impact on migration of potentially environmental refugees from the Pacific to other countries. And so, thinking about, the issues that come along with that, it's hard to think about what comes with that, right? We can think about maybe the things that we can relate to in relative to immigration policy and how that, and just being, from communities of immigrant communities and the issues that we deal with already here. But I think in thinking about 2040 and the work that we're doing at EPIC and the work that we're doing as Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander communities, how are we going to deal with the potential of environmental refugees, of people that will be needing to leave their islands because it's going to be underwater in the next 20 years and become refugees in places where we have families, and that means our families that are currently here. And so I think that in thinking about that, there's going to be a generation of us that are born here, raised here in the U.S., that's going to need to understand what it means to be Pacific Islander and to help other Pacific Islanders that may be displaced by climate change.
And I just want to kind of comment that climate change is a huge issue for the Asian American Pacific Islander electorate. They're polling very high in terms of their interest and their affinity for that issue, very high for their interest and affinity in immigration reform. So I think a lot of what you're saying, Elise, has to do with what can we do today to build the foundation for tomorrow's policies. So Greg and Rita.
Absolutely. I think immigration is a unique issue because many folks here know that the API community is diverse, and we have different stories about how our families and we ourselves have come to the country. And I think it's been important to make sure that those diverse stories have been, we're pushing out those stories more and more. And it's also interesting because there's also a lot of Native folks in the community. And so there was actually, I want to uplift one of our partner organizations, the Council for Native Hawaiians, who actually were part of a campaign that actually was called Native Americans for New Americans, that actually brought in Native Americans into this recent fight for comprehensive immigration reform, and which I thought was very important to show while we are diverse and while we represent a wide range of folks from a variety of countries and places, and many, including folks who are Native here, that we have some similarities and we have a shared vision and want to be able to move forward together collectively as a collective community.
Rita?
Yeah, and I think in terms of work, addressing the immigration and foreignness concept in education, there's been more attention to how we work with refugees and immigrants in schools and whether we're actually serving them well. For example, in the Every Student Succeeds Act, which was signed into law in December, we're going to be looking at English language proficiency rates for the first time. We're going to have that data for every single school. And so I think it's amazing because before, we didn't really know. And if we didn't have the data, we didn't really address it. But now I can tell you which states are not serving their English language learners well and which states are. And soon we'll be able to tell which schools are doing this well and which aren't. And there's a lot more opportunities now, I think, because the perspective is changing on being foreign-born, right? It's shifting from being seen as a deficit to actually being a plus.
An asset.
Yep, we see a lot more interest in dual immersion programs and in language preservation. So I really think by 2040, there's going to be a lot of progress in schools, and there wouldn't be quite the stigma that there is now.
And more, we're involved in a global economy. And actually, it's a value to actually have employees of multiple languages rather than just one language. So I'm glad you mentioned that because I was wondering whether or not there would be less interest in LEP because of this 50-50 relationship, and whether or not people would continue to fight for it. But I think you've addressed that. The answer is no, because we have shared interests as a community. So I think, Greg, you mentioned that as well. So Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders are relatively young. The youth comprise about a third of the population in 2015, but will be a quarter of the population by 2040. In contrast, the NHPI elderly will nearly double to about 1 in 8 by 2040. And as the number of elderly overall in America increases by 72%, Asian American elderly will increase 178%. That's more than double. And Pacific Islander elderly by 205%. That's nearly triple. So what will that mean for our community, the labor market, and caring for our elders? Greg, take that.
I'll go ahead and start. Well, first, there's a growing caregiving sector, many who are immigrants, many who are Asian American and Pacific Islander, and is actually one of the places where we're seeing the growing workforce, and one of the areas where we see opportunities to actually organize and get more of our folks to be able to raise the standards through a labor union. And I think the other thing that I want to share about that too, especially in terms of kind of the generations, is the kind of the opportunities for education and politicization. One thing that is very unique about the API community is that because we have such strong relationships with our family members, there is a unique opportunity to be able to talk about some of the current issues within our families and to engage in, I think, a different kind of conversation around the politics and the moments of today. Even as example, today I was actually having a conversation with my mom about the recent events in Orlando Orlando, and kind of the implications that has in terms of our work, and in terms of our lives, and the multiple identities that some of us have. And I think it's important to kind of think about that intergenerational spirit, and the opportunities that we have to be able to educate each other, politicize each other, but also be able to communicate and come together around a variety of issues.
Thank you. Rita, Lisa, do you have any comments?
Yeah, I think I'm going to touch on the fact that, a third of Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander population is under the age of 18. And so for those of you that are in the room that are educators, that's a place of change, right? That's a place where you can impact the trajectory of somebody's life. And so for our community, it means that we need to advocate for education, not just higher education, but also K through 12 education, and preparing our young people to go into higher education, because if we didn't believe in the potential that higher education brings for our lives and our families, we wouldn't be here today. And I think it's part of our work at EPIC, which is, one of our focuses is on developing young leaders through our Pacific Islander Leaders of Tomorrow program, which focuses on Pacific Islander college students, is because there aren't enough of us that's doing this work. And we need to be able to invest into our young people so they're successful in college, with the hope that they will see their role in our community to help uplift the rest of the generations that are coming up. And so with such a huge proportion of our community being young people, Dr. Thompson stepped out of here, but the work that they had done in the past couple of decades has put our community where we are today. And so if we need to hope bigger things for our community in 2040, that depends on what we're doing today. And so part of that is being part of these conversations, and being able to learn from folks like Dr. Underwood and the work that Neil and them are doing here at the Scholarship Fund to continue to push for the presence and the support that our Pacific Islander need in order for them to be successful, so that they can help to pull everybody else up.
So, as we said earlier, Pacific Islanders are more likely to be multiracial than any other racial group. By the year 2040, 1 in 2 will be multiracial. In fact, it'll be larger than that. And 1 in 6 Asian Americans will be multiracial. What will this mean for the AAPIS designation that they're multiracial? Or what will it mean for the organizing or educational access work that you are involved in?
Well, I was going to say, I don't think having the multiracial definition is going to change the way we organize too much, because I think the issues are going to be fairly common across communities, regardless of your identity. We're going to have issues in terms of getting our students the proper guidance to finish high school, to select courses, to determine their career paths. We're still going to face, I think, issues with having schools and districts comply with the law and provide language access to our parents and families. I think that we're going to have to come to grips with who we are, so that we are comfortable with our identities, but we still have to organize in the same way together.
Yeah, I agree with Rita. I'm not sure if I don't think it's necessarily going to change how we organize, but I do think that there will be other opportunities to connect issues at a variety of intersections, and that we will have kind of more layers to the stories that we are going to share. I know that especially as we're thinking about broader communities, in particular communities of color, I've noticed that there are many Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders who go into kind of those broader spaces, and because of the work of trying to bring together and organize internally within the Asian American Pacific Islander community, which is already so diverse, it actually poises us and equips us to be able to go on more broadly and understand the importance of bringing other communities together. And so I think as the country gets more diverse, I think we'll see an emergence of even more API leaders and API folks at all levels of government and in businesses and corporations, because we'll be able to understand and tell a story of a multicultural America, because we understand just how diverse our communities are.
Great.
Yeah, can I? If I just want to add to that, I think I'm a little bit worried about the multiracial piece just because there aren't enough of our own faces, or there aren't enough spaces that identify with who we are as Asian Americans or Pacific Islanders. And I think I heard it in the panel earlier, the conversation around making sure that we're part of the curriculum, that our histories are being taught, because otherwise, our identity becomes really diluted, and we don't necessarily identify with our own stories if they're not being taught to us. And so I think as part of the organizing work is also like identity building. And so as our population continues to increase in multiracial identities, we need to continue to push for identity building so that we can continue to organize around our issues.
Earlier, you were all asked to show us this triangle of the educational pyramid, right? And what did you do with your hands? Did this. Do you know what that meant? It was about equity. It was about making sure that everything wasn't so narrow at the top that there were only the small number of people at the top and a large number of people at the bottom. And I think one of the things that we're talking about here is the opportunity to really transform the trajectory to enhance equity and bend the arc towards justice. Some of the people who've actually written for this journal is Christine Chen on Asian Pacific Islander vote. This is a question that's for her, but it's also vis-a-vis the three panelists that we have here. But by the year 2040, 1 in 7 voters will be Asian American. Asian American voter numbers will double by the year 2040. And when we actually did a pre-release of that information last year, we got major news coverage on that. That was of such great interest. However, we had a dearth of data when it came down to doing the Pacific Islander projections, so we were not able to do that. So I do want to acknowledge that. But nevertheless, we do know that the Pacific Islander community will grow, and then with that, through the organizing work that EPIC is laying out, engaging more and more people to be very active in their communities and very active at the ballot box. So my question to Lisi, Greg, and Rita is, what does this growth of the Asian American and Pacific Islander vote mean for your constituents, and the vision for educational and social equity, and the Asian American Pacific Islander American dream?
Well, I'll start by saying a quote from Congresswoman Judy Chu. She says that our communities are going from being the marginalized to the margin of victory. And we're seeing more and more and more districts and counties into the state level that our communities are starting to be the margin of victory and the decisive factor in many of these elections, including from presidential to all the way down the ballot. I think that as the electorate grows, I think there will be opportunities to be able to insert more of our issues and the stories of our communities in there, as well as seeing more people that look like us actually running, for us to be excited to know that we can actually be able to elect more folks into office that represent our communities, represent our issues, and represent us. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. And I also think that there's a need to also build more capacity at the local level. And so as we grow in those numbers, we need to continue to push so that we can make those investments at all levels of government and can kind of see those votes translate into resources and programs and opportunities for our communities as well.
All right, so I want a show of hands here. How many of you care about API data disaggregation? Raise your hand, please. All right, so by 2040, because we're going to have the voting power, if 1 in 7 of us are going to be Asian Americans, we better get API data disaggregation in the next reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. We have 4 to 5 chances to get this into federal law so it is done for every elementary, middle, and high school across the nation. Right? I mean, so last year, when ESEA, the Elementary Secondary Education Act, was reauthorized, we had an amendment in there in the Senate version to actually do the API data disaggregation. I don't know how many of you knew the whole story and struggle behind that. But the vote on the amendment last year, even though it failed, was 47-3. 50. And that's without the voting power that we're going to have by 2040. And so if we could get that last year, and that included 3 Republicans, you guys. So, we usually don't see Republicans as being our allies, but, I have to give a shout out to those 3 who understood that within their districts, within their states, they knew they had a large API population that they had to appease, which is why they decided to go against the leadership and vote for our amendment. So I want I want to challenge everybody. By 2040, we're going to have 4 or 5 reauthorizations of both the Higher Education Act and the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. Think about what we want as a community. What do we want? Because we need to ask for it in the next few reiterations as the law is being reauthorized.
Great. Did you also want to talk about this?
Oh, yes. Elena is holding up a postcard that I have in the back because, after after we made a lot of noise about not getting API data disaggregation in the in what replaced No Child Left Behind, the Department of Education released a competitive grant for API data disaggregation. And so states have to apply by August 1st of this year. It's a $1 million grant with 4 awards in 2 categories. One is for states that already disaggregate API data, and the other is for states that don't. So in the category for states that do disaggregate API data, that's California and Hawaii. It's unclear whether Washington is eligible since they don't do it at a statewide level, even though they just passed their legislation. But my point is, California has indicated they are not applying. So all of you who are from California, I want you to write to your superintendent, call him, visit him, go storm the Department of Education in California and say, why are you not doing this? KPAC has sent a letter. All right, the California delegation led by Representative Lowenthal has sent a letter. Your California commissioners for APIs have sent their letters. I've asked numerous districts, Fresno Unified, Oakland, other districts have sent letters, and yet California's not applying? So please, take a postcard, let them know we can't be silenced on this.
So that definitely says that numbers don't necessarily predict the future, but it is the values that we hold and the organizing that we do that actually build the future for tomorrow. Alicia, did you want to comment on?
Yeah, when thinking about voting and civic engagement, we have some of the lowest voter turnout rates than any other racial group, and I think. And speaking on behalf of Pacific Islander communities, I think part of that is just education about what it means to have voting power. And that's something that we're really invested in doing through our work at EPIC. And it's still a lot of work, and we can't do it on our own. But, we can't afford to separate civic engagement from all the other work that we're doing. And so things around education, around health, we continue to try to integrate what it means to be a voter and what it means to be civically engaged. And one of the themes that, we always talk about at EPIC through our leadership program is, educate the educated to be civically engaged. And we need to start there. If we're helping our young people that have made it to college and that are in college, supporting them to graduate and go on to graduate school, we need to also educate them about the value of being civically engaged, and then also encourage them to bring one other person with them. So it's really a grassroots kind of power building, but it's where we need to start at the Pacific Islander community, because it's just the lack of education about what it means to have voting power.
So this week, actually, I was at the White House Summit for the United States of Women, and their motto was, "Today I will change tomorrow." And so my question to the panelists is, we now have numbers that tell us about tomorrow. And I'm going to ask you what you want changed today, or what we should want changed today for a better tomorrow.
I'll be really short. I think I've been saying this all along, is that we need to just invest in our young people, because they're the future. I mean, that sounds really cliche, but it's really true. And for our work at EPIC, if we want to move the needle on social justice for our families, we need to invest in our young people so that they can come back. We always talk about this, everybody wants to get out. Everybody wants to go to school and get out, but it's about going away to go to school and coming back and giving back to your community in whatever capacity that you have. So that means that we need to put ourselves behind our young people and be able to really support them, because we need to build a base of leadership that is invested in our community that can come back and lead, those that are after them, because, we're not always going to be around, but if we can invest in that future, then it looks brighter.
I agree with that, but I'm going to give a different answer. So in terms of what we can change today, I'm going to say that we need to start thinking of ourselves as being those future policymakers, right? Right now we're asking folks to do things for us, but we need to get ourselves into those positions of power so that we can do it for ourselves.
I think we have an opportunity right now. I think we're actually in a unique political moment. I think we have, as the demographics are changing and the numbers are telling us, and as we have new and enhanced tools for organizing and communication, I think one thing that I'd like to see is more of our community joining the struggles and joining arm in arm with other movements. What's the role of APIs with the movement for Black Lives and the Black Lives Matter movement? What's the role of APIs in the fight for immigrant rights and immigrant justice? What's the role of APIs in the fight for LGBT equality? And especially thinking about the recent mass shooting in Orlando. What's the role of APIs in pushing back on anti-Muslim hate and the bigotry and xenophobic rhetoric that's plaguing our election right now? And so I think the most innovative organizing is happening at those intersections. And I not only want to see the API community engaged, but I want to see us at the forefront of bringing that creative, visionary, forward-thinking energy to the front lines. And I know we're on the verge of something, and I know that our folks are feeling something in their hearts and their souls. And so I think you should act on that and really step up to the plate.
That's terrific. And I'm really glad that you mentioned Orlando. One of the things that has been happening all week is people giving a moment of silence to the victims and their loved ones in Orlando. And I wanted to ask you to do the same. But I actually wanted to ask you to share that moment of silence with a moment of voice. Because I think, as we just heard from our speakers here, our silence and our invisibility back in 1965 didn't pay off. But our double digits and our voice amplified will. So I ask each of you, I wanted to kind of open this up. I wanted to make sure there was enough time for Q&A for you to speak your mind, speak your voice about what you're impassioned about, and whether or not it's educational equity and as a pathway to equity. We'd love to hear that and figure out how our panelists can help you move that forward. So I'd love for you to come up to the mic and identify who you are and ask any questions of our panelists.
Don't be shy.
Well, I'm going to have to call on somebody. I'm going to call on Neil. Is that okay? Great. See one, do one, teach one, right?
So like anything else, I like Rita's comment in particular because, what I do every day, and it's not only myself, but it's my entire staff, we go to work every day because we care about students, and we kept repeating this over and over again. It's about the future. And the future is what this panel is about. And the students here, all of our scholars, but it's not this cohort, it's the last cohort, the one before that, but also the cohort that will come next year and the years ahead. And what we told the scholars just the other day in their meeting and session was, what are you going to do when you go back? Remember that question to all the scholars? So really, I want to kind of give this right back to the scholars because it's time for one of the scholars to start saying, what are you going to do when you go back? Because you got 2 days to prepare for the answer. Now's your moment. Because, you're on live broadcast, you're in front of a lot of people right here, right now, in front of the panel who just reported on the next few decades. The next few decades are going to be a turning point for not only this community, but the nation. And so we're looking to you as well, because chances are in 2040, I'm not going to be doing this job. You might be doing this job. You might be doing this job in 20 years. So may I kind of give this microphone back to a student, one of the scholars. Any one of you. What are you going to do when you go back? Because you are the leaders.
We have a great...
Yay!
This is the social return on your investment in education.
Hello, everyone. My name is Khalid Shah. When I'm going back home, I'm working on a project right now for high school and mostly high school and college students, and to help them. So I'm organizing something, but I don't know how long it's going to take me to actually make it and launch it. But I'm hoping this summer I do that. I'm planning to make a first Facebook page, and then later on like a YouTube or a big video sessions with the other scholars or other people who already graduated from community colleges or colleges that or they are successful in their lives, to give motivation to the students in the high school and college, because I know I've been through I'm going through college and it's hard, and sometimes we lose motivation and sometimes we just want to give up. So I think that we need a part of the motivation, and since most of us use social media more than anything else, so I want to start with social media and reach out to them that there are opportunities like APIASF. I received a scholarship. It was like a kind of a moment for me that somebody trusted me and I can do it. And I want other people to experience the same thing. It's something that I'm going to be doing. But the thing is that for the panelists, I have a question that I know you guys belong to like organizations and stuff. So how are you going to, like, what is the advice for me? Like, how can I begin my journey, like, from the beginning?
Thank you so much.
Well, I'm going to advise you to reach out to other students, right? Because if you want to form this group and this project to help support and mentor other students, then make sure you have a lot of other student input so you can have a wide perspective. And also, I'm sure that everybody's going to have a particular skill that they can lend you to help with the project, whether it's somebody's great at social media, or somebody's good with messaging, or somebody's good at motivating the other people who are supposed to turn in the stuff that you need to put up, right? Because you need that motivator. So make sure you form a group of people who are just as excited as you about your project, and you'll make it happen.
I would say dream big. I never would have thought that I would be in DC working at a national advocacy organization, and I think it's important to really picture yourself. If you want to be the next Neil and run the scholarship fund, imagine yourself being the next Neil running the scholarship fund. I also think I would surround myself by people who share the vision and who will continue to uplift you and support you. I know that there's, in the media and a lot of things that are put out there, there's been a lot of negative energy, a lot of negative things happening, and I think it's important to surround yourself with love and laughter and happiness, and that will actually really help continue to inspire you, to continue to motivate you, but keep you on track. And the people will hold you accountable. The people will help pick you up if you fall. The people will continue to push you as you are reaching for those goals you dream so big for. And so I would definitely recommend doing that.
Same thing. Build community with folks that share your vision. I would also challenge you to reach across and build coalition and allyship with other communities of color, because I think it's really important that we realize that we have common struggles, and then they are often very big support in making sure that, you know, things that you're working for happen.
So this week I've heard this message repeated several times, and that is a message from the president that you can't be the change you want to see unless you are mentored and you see it. There's another person by the name of Gandhi who actually said, be the change you want to see. I think you have that potential in this room by being mentored through this organization. And leadership isn't about telling you how to do it, but it's teaching you the skills so that you can empower yourselves to accomplish these goals in the future. You've heard about the value of collaboration here, that being incredibly critical, the value of actually looking at the future when 1 out of 2 Americans will be persons of color, and the importance of unifying with that group as well as whites, for that matter, because that's another part of a multiraciality. I do want to hear another question from someone else. Anybody else? Yes.
Hello again. My name is Suwaima Liwai Al from Pahawang, American Samoa. And my question to our panelists is, I don't know if you heard recently that the Supreme Court basically rejected appeal for American Samoa to become U.S. citizens, and we're basically the only territory and out of Guam, Puerto Rico, Saipan, and Marianas Islands that they're not U.S. citizens. So what do you think about the Supreme Court ruling?
So we've been getting this question a lot as EPIC. And I will say formally as EPIC, we don't take a position on this because we believe that the people of American Samoa should self-determine for themselves what they want for their rights. Because those of us, you know, that we have, those of us that are here in the United States don't have the right to determine what should happen in American Samoa. That should be determined by people of American Samoa. There's also a lot of complexity about a lot of things beyond just the rights to vote that comes with citizenship. Things like land ownership that is traditionally a communal thing for Samoans, but that have the potential to be impacted with such a decision, which is why, as EPIC, we don't have a stance on this because we really believe that that decision should be made by American Samoans for themselves.
Do any of you want to talk about the role of town halls and forums and the education outside the educational institution?
In addressing that question?
Yeah. Well, no? Okay. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I was going to go to a different direction, but I'm not sure exactly. Yeah. Why don't you go read it then?
I was going to say this reminds me of the DC statehood struggle in a way, because here in DC, I'm a resident of DC, we have taxation without representation, and we're struggling to become a state, and yet we've been denied that. So I think you have to figure out as residents, as Elise said, what is it that you really want? And if you want it, don't let the Supreme Court stop you. The Supreme Court also said, separate but equal at one point was okay for our school systems. They overturned that. So if you really truly believe, and you want citizenship, then continue the struggle. Don't let the Supreme Court, say that you can't have it.
I'll just add that I'll build on what Elise said. I think that there's lots of complexities around citizenship. I think one thing that I've learned from the undocumented community, particularly the undocumented youth, is that while many folks are seeing that as a goal or a means, that there are people who actually have citizenship who feel like they're still not free and still not able to live the lives they want to live in the U.S. And that's actually been a part of a conversation around with the intersection of the immigrant rights movement and the Black Lives Matter movement. And so I think I would just say that it's important to kind of reiterate, Alicia and Rita, is to think more broadly around what is it exactly that we want, what is it that we want, what do our communities need, and whether it's through citizenship or other means, I think we should be creative in how we address those concerns and how we address those needs, and actually how we bring those opportunities home.
Right, thank you. And I just wanted to say, with reference to the town halls, that we're very lucky to be among educators among this group, academics among this group, et cetera. And then in those halls are also opportunities to have town halls and forums where we can actually get at what people want rather than telling them what to do. So rather than speaking at them, listening. And actually, you've been on listening tours. Do you want to talk about your listening tour?
Sure. CIRAC has been doing a variety of listening tours in partnership with NCAPA, the National Council for Asian Pacific Americans, because as I mentioned earlier, last year in December, the president signed into law the Every Student Succeeds Act to replace No Child Left Behind. And this year, every single state is looking at how do they update their laws and their school systems to comply with the new law. And the law actually requires that each state meaningfully consults with public stakeholders, including students, parents, teachers, civil rights organizations, and other stakeholders. And, while there have been listening sessions for the public, we've discovered that they're not always convenient to our communities. They're not held at the times or spaces or places that we want them to be held. So CIRAC and NCAPA and OCA and others have come together to actually host a series of them. We were just in California for a weekend tour where we went up to Sacramento on Friday and Fresno on Saturday and Long Beach on Sunday, and we asked the community, what do you want? And everything that was told to us, we wrote down, and we did get a commitment from the Department of Education that they're going to review our notes, that they're going to give it to their senior leadership that is developing guidance documents. And so, I invite any of you outside of California that if you want a listening session in your state, come see me, and we will figure it out, and we'll try to make it happen.
And I know, Lisa, you want to say something. I just wanted to interject. The young man who was brave enough to come to the microphone earlier, this is an incredible social media opportunity to actually videotape these town halls, post them on YouTube, educate people, inform decision makers, including nonprofit agencies as well as elected officials, what people want, so what people think. So if you're actually willing to construct a survey online to be a companion to your YouTube, you can empower what people are talking about, the change you want to see. Go ahead.
Yeah, now that I had given my very sterile answer on behalf of EPIC, the organizer and the student in me is really pulling at me about this really important question that the scholar asked about this case, and that is just we need to be better students of history and really think about what happened to the Native Hawaiians and their rights to land, and what happens to Guam and their rights to their land, and the struggle that they're currently going through to fight to have a say in the way that land is being used and land is being owned. And I think that's a really important consideration to think about. And I'm just speaking as an organizer, as a Pacific Islander, even that those are things that we need to learn as students, is to just be great students of history and what has happened to our islands through colonization, and how that has impacted where we are today with regards to policy.
Well, I think that concludes where we're at. I want to thank you for being an actively engaged audience, and I'm hoping that you will join me in applause for our panelists. Thank you all.
So I want to give another round of applause to that panel. I mean, they're really outstanding leaders. You know, this is the kind of insight that always excites me when you have the top leaders in all their fields together with Elena, you know, who's leading this really monumental book at the right time, at the right place. So really thank you all for your leadership.